Hi, I'm Zoe Zwecker. I'm a student at Colorado College. I'm an environmental science and global health major. And this summer I worked with Dr. Brady Granger to look at pollution and diabetes within Durham County, North Carolina. So the research we conducted was really centered around this one comprehensive and seemingly general question: why is there such a strong prevalence of diabetes in Durham? This isn't outwardly complicated, but when we look into averages in Durham and even in particular neighborhoods, we can tell that there are some unanswered questions within the narrative because there are some really high-risk populations. So my approach to this problem was to look at diabetes through a geospatial lens. And this perspective and methodology provides us with the ability to look at problems as layers of variables. So when these layers are compiled, we quite literally have a more complete picture of people's life experience and health outcomes in relation to any arrangement of these different factors. So I also wanted to look at environmental health, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, but just to refresh everybody's mind, environmental health explores the interconnection of the built and natural environment in how it relates to population health. So even moving way back in time, Durham used to be a hotspot for the textile and tobacco industry. So it's always been really important to be thinking about environmental health here. So when I was framing my study, some of the key things that I was thinking about were patterns, locations, exposure, and accessibility within Durham in relation to the environment and how that might be related to diabetes. And what I immediately discovered was that the two were really interconnected. So this is my overarching question, narrowed in. So does diabetes prevalence follow a pattern related to pollution? So you guys might be thinking, pollution, why, what? It's well known at this point that certain atmospheric pollutants like ozone impact health. Another important pollutant to think about, however, is particulate matter. PM 2.5 describes particles from industrial sources that are really small, denoted by the subscript. Though I'm no expert in the toxicology related to the effects of pollution and health, there's a growing body of literature that kind of draws the links between these two things and links it to metabolic dysfunctions like diabetes. So I wanted to see if this was true in Durham. So the way that we proposed that we would do this is by using geocoded data. Using geocoded data, which takes patients' medical history and combines it with their address so that we can put it on a map. Then we're able to overlay it with other variables like roads, homes, industry, and pollution sources. What we find when we look at this is that Durham is actually pretty good in relation to other places in North Carolina, but this metric that the Environmental Protection Agency denotes is sort of irrelevant in places because this is just an average within the whole community. So this will lead me into some of the limitations in a second. So we have a lot of next steps in this kind of study. The first is getting the level of granularity within the data that we want, accessing addresses to which we can also overlay with specific source pollution sites with concentrations. We also need to consider like ethical considerations for the trial, such as if it's randomized, controlled, or if it's merely observational, both which are important. And then we need to build a model to adjust for confounding variables. So I'll talk about that now. So a lot of people have talked about the social determinants of health and how they are related to health outcomes like diabetes. That's exactly what this map is showing over here on the right. And so what we need to do is we need to build a model to adjust for these types of things so that we can really more accurately draw the connection to diabetes and pollution. So there's a lot to think about on the policy forefront. The first is kind of viewing the environment and health as interconnected. that leads us to be able to make a targeted intervention plan. We identify high-risk populations depending on prevalence of diabetes and environmental factors. And that allows us to increase access to monitoring sites and preventative measures for diabetes. Then we can work on improving health and environmental initiatives, one of which I think the most important is green spaces. Durham has done a few things here. One of the most exciting, I think, could be the Durham Greenbelt proposal, which meanders throughout different neighborhoods that are high risk in Durham. And this both improves some of the environmental hazards that we're thinking about, and also gets people out walking, which is preventative for thinking about diabetes. So it's been really fun for me to think about these connections this summer, and I look forward to continuing this work. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so any questions for Zoe?
This is Brady. I want to say thanks to Zoe for doing such a great job with the limited data that we had for this summer related to the project. And also, I just wanted to point out the importance of the way that Zoe's project, looking at environmental factors and health, relates to Cameron's project and many others that were presented today and last week on other things that affect health. So part of the great thing about Margolis is being able to listen to the work that you all have done and see how many connections we can make and how they all have policy implications. So I think it's been great. Thanks to everybody.
Thank you. Okay, and then I was trying to think, so Zoe, if you're from Colorado College, did you get to learn some about Durham even though you didn't get to be in Durham when looking at all the geospatial analysis? So hopefully you can come visit Durham at some point. So
yeah, I hope that I spent a little bit of time in Durham with Brady actually, but
okay.
You know, the COVID experience limited things. But yeah, it was just looking at maps and stuff, I was able to get a good sense of what's happening geographically there. Yeah.
Right.